Theresa May has decided she wants to build a shared society. But don't we already share a society? Isn't that what society is? Anywho, she gave a speech in which she stated that she intends to start this sharing process by addressing the stigma of mental illness, at which point the cry rang out, "And how much money are you going to spend?" Unsurprisingly, those making this demand have tended to come from the mental health profession, because as anyone who has ever accessed mental health services knows, it exists solely and purely for the staff and not the patient. At which point, no doubt, those working in mental health services will immediately respond, "That's not true," thereby proving my point. The example I would offer is cognitive behaviour therapy, which according to the "It's Science" crowd is most effective of the talking therapies, and they will offer link after link of gobbledygook and hocus-pocus sciencey stuff to back up this assertion. For those who don't know, CBT, aka cock and ball torture, is the love child of the 5-a-day nanny state and the Jeremy Kyle show. The treatment works by browbeating the patient with simplistic solutions to often complex problems for 10 sessions, and then, if the issues are not resolved, the therapist gets to accuse the patient of not trying hard enough to implement the prescribed behaviour modification. As I said, the evidence-based sciencey crowd will disagree. Yet what they appear not to notice is that since CBT became the only treatment offered by the NHS under the Blair government, rates of mental illness have increased, and so has the suicide rate. Before you run off to grab that handful of links, consider this. When you go for any kind of talking therapy, the first thing they will say is, "You can say anything you want, but I warn you that if you mention anything criminal, then I have a duty to grass you up." Thus it is hardly surprising that people will tend to put up with being bossed about for 10 sessions in order to get their "not insane" certificate, before toddling off, often completely unchanged by the experience except by the natural events that occurred within that 10-week time frame. And no, I am not suggesting that mental illness is correlated with criminality, but it is strongly linked to guilt. And when you have a therapy that deliberately seeks to avoid introspection and offers simplistic solutions at every turn, "Oh, you have to check the door 3 times when you leave the house. Well, let me stop you there for a minute. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, will you try that? And then so what?" etc. ad nauseum. In fact, it is little wonder that CBT is so popular with the sciencey crowd, as like them, CBT therapists always think they understand the problem based on nothing more than the preamble. Cynics might scoff at Theresa May's suggestion that actually the problem is not money, but stigma. Leave aside for a moment the whole SJ language police thing about the frequency with which people use mental illness as an insult. "You're a schizo, paranoid, mad," etc. in everyday speech. And we can forget about the Disability Discrimination Act. Everybody else does. You may well have that not insane certificate from the CBT snake oil salesman, but that means very little when getting or keeping a job. In fact, it is a big red mark against you, a situation made worse by the Blair government and their fetish for CRB checks and the like. Suddenly, that period of sleeplessness in your teens diagnosed as mild depression closes all kinds of avenues of employment. For instance, of what relevance is it that you couldn't sleep at 16 because your girlfriend left you when applying for an LGV licence when you're 35? None. But you will be expected to declare that depressive episode. The same goes for a spectrum of employment. Ironically, about the only jobs that don't ask are jobs like call centres, which are well known for inducing mental illness. Rectifying this situation doesn't cost any money. In fact, treating mental illness in much the same way as the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, i.e. writing off the conviction after a certain number of years, would be a very sensible approach. And making that comparison only emphasises the stigma that is attached to mental illness, because let's face it, mental illness is a conviction, without a jury, often with little more evidence than the kangaroo court of a pill-pushing doctor. And in any case, the certified mentally ill are often no more ill and or dangerous than the sane who had the good sense to keep themselves out of the clutches of the medical health profession.